Documentary no longer just exists in its linear form. It is an expanded ecology of platforms, practices, sites, and communities that are multilinear, multiscalar, participatory, and performative. These expanded forms that are interactive, immersive, embodied, and emplaced challenge the transmission model that imparts knowledge through speaking the world to us, and instead foregrounds practices of listening. I could spend time here discussing the multiple ways in which we speak about vision, sight, and visible evidence. But what does it mean to listen, and how can expanded documentary encourage different modes of listening? Listening is interdisciplinary. In sound studies, we can talk about the spatial properties, the unbounded nature of sound compared to vision, the multiplicity of coexisting sounds or perspectives. Experimenting with the interactive platform Korsakov allowed for the coexistence of different experiences of aloneness, meaning that I could represent the complexity of different interpretations. For some, it was a celebration of time with oneself. For another, there was a strong correlation between neoliberalism and loneliness. Another was connected to grief, and another reflected on relational subjectivity and questioned if we are ever alone. The overlapping voices and the ability to listen in and tune in to the similarities and differences and multiple perspectives could be navigated through the interactivity. I was reminded of this recently when watching Anagram's VR film Goliath, which uses multiple coexisting voices at times to reflect the experience of schizophrenia. There's a sequence in the film where different health professionals talk about the condition. The voices emerge in streams of abstract shapes. Using the hand controllers, you can mix the sound and select which voices to listen to at the same time. No two expert opinions are the same. The voices dissipate, and we are left with only partial knowledge. Being guided by orality through interactivity imbues the listener with agency in determining which voices are heard in the plurality and which ones to listen to, a choice maybe not afforded to somebody with psychosis. To listen ethically is to attend to care for, to respect another, whether it be human or other than human. It is, in the words of Lisbeth Lapari, a hosting of other as a guest, as a not me. In this way, listening can be an act of care. Care has its roots in cura, to cure. Practices of care are traditionally associated with the feminine, and like listening, care has long been undervalued as women's work. The past few years have seen renewed interest in the interdisciplinary study of care through art, politics, economics, and kinship. Listening can be a practice of care in the activity itself and also how it can be operationalized to form communities. Or as Jean-Luc Nancy suggests, to interrupt our singularities. The pandemic offered opportunities to consider our relationship to the idea of the community and a collective. And as our immediate environments quietened with less traffic and noise, it also afforded the possibility to listen in on the changing world. It was in this time, epitomised by togetherness and aloneness, that prompted a rethinking of the individual and the collective, if only through the material fact of living with a highly contagious virus, which is largely invisible. In the absence of being able to spend time together during lockdowns, my collaborators and I embarked on a project of listening to and recording sounds over 2 months. From 30th of April to 30th of June, we would collect a sound a day. After 2 months, we met online to find common themes. This more collective and individual process of listening felt significant. It was an interruption of the singularities through a shared act of listening to the world around us, the sonic and the dystonic. A number of other documentary projects emerged through the time of the pandemic as collective acts of being together. The crowdsourced Corona diaries allowed participants to record their reflections on the day in short diaristic pieces, which in turn facilitated a sense of community around a shared experience, with the ability to listen in to other voices. Corona diaries embraces the polyphonic, which can generate heterotopias through assemblages of difference, diversity, and interdisciplinarity, where multiple voices and perspectives coexist.
My name is Megan.
In another work about the coronavirus, and as a way to honour those that had died, Jamie Pereira's We All Fall Down is a 10-hour durational work which sonifies the data from every COVID-19 related death in the UK, from the first death on March the 5th, 2020, up until August the 16th. In this work, listening demands time and slowness as an act of care and attention to both the lived experience through conversations and testimonies, with each and every death sounded through musical instruments which signify how and where these deaths occurred. Listening can be political and across difference and to dissonance, and it's what political theorist Chantal Mouffe acknowledges as a plurality of differences. Listening should be viewed, therefore, not in isolation, but part of a civic, ethical, and political participation. In direct response to political division in the US, and with an increasing awareness of the tribalism of politics, filter bubbles and echo chambers, Halsey Bergan's Radio Left-Right is probably the most immediate example of an attempt to map the spectrum of different political perspectives. The interface also allows user-generated content. Participants can upload their responses about the concerns of the political landscape. And listening in on these contributions, there's a clear desire from the participants to hear perspectives that are from outside of their own bubble. Radio Left-Right invites a listening to the dissonance that is democracy. But as an open source user-generated interactive documentary project, it does naturally attract a certain kind of participation. And I do wonder, what is possible in documentary? Can we hear these voices unmediated and filtered through an authorial framing? And can documentary really hold a space for disparate views? And should we expect it to? Is everyone included? And how do we hear the unsympathetically different? While interactive documentary facilitates multiple different and potentially diverging perspectives, I think there is more scope to use it as a tool for citizenship and democracy as this plurality of voices and difference. Listening can also be an act of solidarity, especially the collective act of listening together. Faranetti and Firth discuss activist art practices that involve collective listening in what they suggest has roots in feminist consciousness-raising groups of the 1960s. Here, women would gather and share their experiences, with speaking and listening equally important. In the absence of the participant of a documentary, how might collective acts of listening be mobilised as a practice of listening together and listening as solidarity? In How Are You Today by the Manus Recording Project Collective, refugees in offshore detention on Nauru and Manus Island recorded 10-minute daily audio diaries about what they saw, where they were, and how they felt. In 2018, as part of Liquid Architecture's ear-witnessing exhibition in Melbourne, an audience of listeners gathered in a room to hear these scratchy recordings made on smuggled mobile phones. Yes, the seats were hard and the recordings difficult to hear and sometimes boring, but listening with others made us feel more implicated in the cruel government's regime. When these refugees were brought to Australia at the beginning of 2020 and kept in detention in dank hotels, the recordings continued and were distributed to listeners as text messages. These are now available on a platform that gives information about where they are now since being released a few months ago. As an act of resistance and solidarity, listening together can form micro-publics that can lead to action. A turn to listening is a reclamation and acknowledgement that this is not a passive sense, as listening can instigate action. In Dorit Naman's interactive documentary, Jerusalem, We Are Here, the participants select 3 virtual audio walks through the neighbourhood of Kataman in Jerusalem. Designed as a web-based iDoc, a significant component of the work was the performance and discussion of the work at conferences, festivals and community centres, often attended by Palestinians who would come together to listen to the stories of a place they could no longer return to. These collective spaces for listening and speaking acted as counter spaces to resist the erasure of the former residents who were forcibly removed.
J'ai toujours vu mon père jardiner. Je n'avais jamais vraiment compris son attachement à cette terre, la patience qui le faisait passer des heures le dos courbé, les mains dans le sol. Jusqu'à ce que moi aussi, un jour, j'ai mon jardin.
In this way, expanded and interactive documentary can facilitate listening in the face of extinction and erasure, such as language. Seen in the Australian documentary My Grandmother's Lingo, where the participant listens to the endangered Aboriginal language Mara, repeating the words, and in return, the documentary listens back in reciprocity.
Mara?
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 Mara? Mara? A turn to the sonic, the oral and the listen to as a way to rethink how documentary can function as a model for engagement with the phenomenological world. The works discussed here foreground listening directly, or I frame them as such, in order to reflect their capacity to promote thinking about difference, complexity and multiplicity. This is essential, for as Vergelin writes, a turn to the sonic, the oral and the listen to is a way to rethink how documentary can function as a model for engagement with the phenomenological world. The works I've just discussed either foreground listening directly, or I frame them as such in order to reflect their capacity to promote thinking about difference, complexity and multiplicity. Through listening to documentary, we become implicated in the stories, experiences, lived realities of not only other humans, but also the other than human,